Hey there, welcome back to a weekly news recap here on Bald Prairie Real Estate. My name's Matthew Pfeifer, I'm a real estate agent from Regina, and that is my trusted assistant, Matilda. Now, of course, everybody knows it is really expensive to buy a house in Canada, even if house prices are currently coming down. But one of the biggest contributors to high house prices, well, it's not foreign buyers, although we are going to be talking about that a little bit later in this week's news recap. So before we get into showing you exactly why Canadian housing is so expensive, let's start off with another terrible joke. What do you call a dog that's underwater? A subwoofer. If you have a terrible dad joke that I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's get into the news. Starting off with a good news topic here, and that is some continued changes to Realtor.ca. They started earlier this year providing information and started in BC for sale prices. Now that is only available for active listings. So you can't just go look up any house in the neighborhood and see what it's sold for. This is for active listings. Now, when I was looking at this just before I shot this video, looking through some listings, yes, you do see sold prices, but it only appears to be the last sale price, not a full history. And the data did seem to be a little bit inconsistent. Some houses had it, some didn't. So I'm glad they're continuing to provide this. More information, more transparency is better. I'd like them to speed up that process and make this available across the country. And in Nova Scotia, they've started a trial program where they're going to show whether the house is conditionally sold, even though it's still on the market. This is a frustration I have as a buyer. People will phone me up and say, hey, let's go take a look at this house. And I have to tell them, hey, it's actually conditionally sold already. So again, these are little baby steps forward to make the Realtor.ca website better. I wish they'd roll these changes out faster and across the country. The next article here is a report from TD on their forecast for the 2023 Canadian real estate market. Now, I already did my 2023 forecast video. I'll put a link to that in the description below so you can check that one out. And I did talk about some of TD's predictions in that video. We're going to go a little more in depth right now. One of the major things they've talked about is that they're expecting the fewest number of homes in Canada to sell in 2023 since 2001, not 2021. So a very slow year for home sales. And as is kind of the consensus across the board, TD is also expecting home prices in Canada will bottom out in 2023, likely in the spring, before starting to rebound in 2024. If you've been watching this channel for a while now, you shouldn't be surprised that they're also expecting that Saskatchewan and Alberta will see the smallest declines in 2023 and the largest increases in 2024. Next up, I want to talk a little bit more about Canada's foreign buyer ban. Now, this article that I will put the link to below is talking about a temporary foreign worker that lives in Calgary that has come here, they've got established, they were getting ready to buy a house in Canada, and now because of the foreign buyer ban, they can no longer buy a house. But I actually want to talk about a more personal story because I have someone here that wants to buy a house in Regina. They're from the Ukraine. They fled the war there, came here to start a new life. And because of the foreign buyer ban, they can't come and start a new life here in Canada. Now, there is exemptions in the foreign buyer ban for refugees and those fleeing conflict, and it specifically outlines who is exempt. But because this person came under a special program that was set up for Ukrainians fleeing the war, but it wasn't mentioned in the exemptions list, this person appears to not be able to buy a house in Canada. And that to me just seems so hypocritical that we are going to be a welcoming country and welcome these people that are fleeing conflict. They've left with nothing, but they can come here and they can't buy a house. This is not the person the foreign buyer ban should be targeting, and yet the exemptions are not provided for this person to be able to buy a house in Canada. I just think this is so frustrating that we put this foreign buyer ban, and these are the people that are getting caught up in the foreign buyer ban, when really the person that was supposed to be targeted by this ban, there's a lot of loopholes available for them to continue to purchase houses in Canada. Next up here is a report from Point 2 Homes talking about the least expensive and most expensive places in Canada to both rent and own a home in Canada. When it talks about the least expensive places to rent and own a home in Canada, Quebec comes out on top with a number of Quebec cities on both lists there for both ownership and rental. On those lists as well for cheapest places to buy and rent is Winnipeg, St. Catharines, and Sudbury. That is the second time in 2 weeks, I believe, I've talked about Sudbury being a very affordable place to both buy and rent in Canada. Of course, the most expensive places, the usual suspects are on the list, Toronto and Vancouver, but the most expensive place to both buy and rent a property in Canada is Oakville, Ontario. This next report here is from RBC, and it's showing how much income you need to qualify to buy a home in different areas across the country. Now, of course, in places like Toronto and Vancouver, where interest rates are really impacting the market and prices have gone down nearly 20% in those two centers, you have to have actually 30% more income to qualify to buy a house in those two cities. So that's pretty significant. Prices have gone down a bunch and you still need to have more income to qualify for a mortgage. That's of course because of higher interest rates. Now, the places where you need the smallest income to qualify, well, that is Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the eastern provinces, the Maritimes, and Alberta sneaks on that list as well. Of course, they have some of the lowest house prices in Canada. Now let's talk about the big topic here, and that is the cost of home ownership in Canada. Of course, buying a house in Canada is really expensive, and there's a lot of reasons why it's so expensive. It's a multifaceted question with a lot of answers, but one that I don't think very many people are talking very much about, that is government fees and taxes on new home construction. Now, if you take, for example, in Vancouver, in just the last 2 years, development fees have gone up nearly 25%. In Toronto, they've gone up 30%. In those two cities, it's usually typically 25 to 30% of the cost of a home in new construction is just developer fees and taxes because of various forms of taxation from the different levels of government. And this is the same government that goes out and preaches affordability. We need to make housing more affordable. And it's the big bad developers. That's why homes are so expensive, because they're gouging you and taking too much money. And yet usually the government fees are more than the developer profit. Very interesting there. Now, of course, this is talking about new construction. People are saying, well, what about resale? Well, when it's really expensive to build new homes like it is in Canada, you're not going to see very many homes built. And that means that the homes that are available for sale, the resale ones, continue to be more expensive because we can't add more supply. There's a whole bunch of reasons why we can't add more supply, but developer fees are continuing to drive up the cost of new home ownership in Canada, making home ownership across the board more expensive. Now, if you missed it, that is my 2023 Canadian real estate predictions video. Check that one out and see what I think is going to happen this year in the Canadian real estate market. Please, if you like this video, give me a like. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. Leave comments below because I love chatting with you guys in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching.